Chapter 7 of Tractate Bava Basra continues on the various laws of sales, now particularly on property sales. The first Mishnah says, if somebody sells a large area of earth, 75,000 square cubits, or a base kar as it was called, and there are clefts or rocks throughout, 10 handbreadths deep or high, they are not included in the measurement of the field, and the full amount of land must be provided from leveled ground. If they were under 10 handbreadths, it would be included in the field sale. If the seller said he's selling about this 75,000 cubits, then even cleft or rocks above 10 handbreadths are included in the sale. The Gemara brings a very similar principle regarding redeeming a consecrated field for coins, saying that clefts or rocks above 10 handbreadths are excluded. Some say specifically over there it's referring to clefts filled with water, as they're not fit for planting, so therefore are not subject to payment for redemption. This is explained to apply also by our Mishnah too, that the clefts are filled with water. But this still only applies if the clefts are over 10 handbreadths deep, as mentioned, as such a thing makes the plot of land as if it's separated into different plots. Also regarding the rocks, they're only excluded from the sale if they exceed an area of 4 kav. Some say this 4 kav of rocks must be distributed over 5 kav. Others say over a majority of the field. So if a majority of the rocks are concentrated within a minority of the field, and a minority of the rocks are spread out over a majority of the field, that would stand unresolved. Anyways, if the rocks are arranged in a circle, in a straight line, or like horns, or in a zigzag, that's all unresolved. Also, if there's a single rock by a field's boundary or adjacent to it, even a very small one, it's not included in the sale of the field. If there was a small separation between the boundary and the rock, or if the rock was beneath the surface of the boundary, it stands unresolved. New Mishnah. If somebody is being sold 75,000 square cubits of earth, and it's a tiny bit smaller than this, as measured by a rope, the price must be reduced proportionately. If the land was a tiny bit larger than specified, it must be returned. However, if the seller said he's selling 75,000 square cubits, more or less, approximately, then the sale stands even if it's a bit more or a bit less. But if the sale was larger by a quarter kav per sa'ah, the buyer needs to repay him extra with money, or if the seller prefers to just return the excess land. Money was said to be an option, so that way the seller won't just be left with a tiny useless plot of land. This is demonstrated from some scenarios. Also, if the person is returning the extra quarter kav per sa'ah of land, he also would need to return all excess land, not just that amount. The Gemara debates the scenario if the seller said he's selling 75,000 cubits without specifying at all if it's an exact or approximate measure. It quotes a few discussions and proves that it's the equivalent of saying an approximate amount. Anyways, if there is a large amount of excess land, we said it could either be returned as money or as property. This is explained to be a decision that is made entirely by the seller, although if the price of the land was originally low and then went up, the seller can only demand payment from the original price. It additionally discusses some particular cases and asks a number of unresolved questions on these laws. New Mishnah. If a seller said he's returning land as measured by a rope, but then afterwards adds more or less, the second statement of more or less reduces the amount to be approximate. If he says the land's measurement, more or less, and then adds as measured by a rope, the second statement nullifies the first and makes the measurement precise. The Gemara says this Mishnah was just one opinion. Others completely disagree and say it's uncertain what we follow. A third opinion actually says that we follow whichever statement gives the buyer less. It's debated as to who agrees with which opinions. New Mishnah. If the seller sells a field and identifies it by the landmarks and boundaries, and the field was later found to be a different size, if the difference is less than a sixth, the buyer just gets the field without any adjustment. If the difference is greater than a sixth, there's a deduction made from the price. The Gemara says there's a debate if a deviation of exactly 1/6 is considered to be less or more than a sixth. This would create variation in the interpretation of the Mishnah, so it argues this from a few quoted cases. It disputes this along with a related discussion on some laws of inheritance. Additional particular cases on these principles are mentioned, although the laws of inheritance will be more clearly spoken on in the following chapter. For instance, if two brothers divide an inherited estate and a creditor from the father who had lent him money comes and takes from the estate as payment for the debt, it's a rule that the original division is then void. Also, if 3 judges were appraising the property of orphans and their appraisals are all different, one saying the land is worth 100 coins and the other is saying it's worth 200 coins, it said the minority opinion is nullified. If all 3 have differing opinions though, one saying the property is worth 100 coins, the other saying it's worth 80 coins, and the last saying it's worth 120 coins, some say it's just valued at 100 coins as that's the median. Others say we do 90 coins, as we assume the first 2 judges were off by 10 coins and then we just disregard the last judge's opinion. Others say we subtract the lowest value from the highest value and divide by 3, and add that to the lowest value. So here that would be 93.3 coins. The logic isn't really understood as to why this calculation is used, but it's said that this is the law we hold like. New Mishnah. If somebody sold somebody half his field, but didn't specify which half, the quality falls between them, which will be defined, and the buyer takes half. If the seller said he's selling the southern half of the field, the quality falls between them, and the buyer gets the southern half. Also, the seller must accept upon himself to make space for the fence, a wide trench, which is 6 handbreadths, and a narrow trench, which is 3 handbreadths. The Gemara says in the first case, when it says the quality falls between them, this means the buyer gets the worst half. In the second case, when the seller specified the southern field, the buyer still gets the worst half, as he meant he's selling the value of the southern field. Regarding the trenches, there's a narrow trench dug and then the wide one afterwards outside the actual property. This is to prevent animals from jumping the fence. It's in this order, as if the wide trench was first, the animal could land in the trench and jump out over the fence. The wide trench is necessary to have placed down to prevent the animal from going to the lip of the narrow trench and then just jumping over. The space between these trenches must be a handbreadth. And that's the end of chapter 7.